3, 2, 1. Mr. Craig Burgess, let's do this! And here we go. It's Let's Solve the Universe. We are live across... We are now international because we have an international guest on the show. Well, I mean, I've had international guests, but the United States doesn't count as international. Mr. Craig Burgess coming to us from... Actually, where are you based out of? I forgot to ask that.
A place called Barnsley in the UK.
Ah, Barnsley in the UK. Excellent. That's awesome. So you are observing British summertime. So that is a couple of hours ahead of us. It's your afternoon, yeah?
3 p.m. right now.
3 p.m. right now, and it is 10 a.m. here in London, Ontario, the boring London. How are you doing this afternoon, sir?
I'm good. The weather's good. It's sunny outside. In fact, it's been sunny all of this lockdown, which is at least one of the saving graces. I get to go sit outside. Weather's glorious. Yeah, can't complain. We've actually got good weather in Britain right now. Good weather.
Oh, nice. Are you the type of person that generally does yoga and eats granola outside when the weather's good?
No, I've got ginger hair for a start, so I burn instantly. So I can spend approximately 30 seconds in the sun of any day. So I jump from shadow to shadow. I'm a day walker, as some people call me.
I feel like that's a quote from that South Park episode about, yeah, man, that was a good one.
Yeah, I've got no soul either, obviously.
Oh, that's awesome. So thanks, man, for coming on the show. We originally started chatting on Twitter because I think we're both mutual followers of the Rogue Wealth account.
Yeah, that's right.
And he got talking about these no-code minimum viable product websites or web apps, and then I made some sort of snarky comment about, ask me about the startup that went through hell because they relied on a no-code MVP, and then we decided to do a podcast about it. And since then, you've been working on a million different things, and you've got some interesting branding and content ideas that I want to get your opinion on and ask you more about, because you've been working on a lot of awesome things.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm trying to keep myself busy, basically, because we're all stuck in our houses, or at least I'm in my garden sometimes. But yeah, just keeping myself busy, trying new things. And to be honest, that's what I always try and do, because I think it's the way that we grow and how we find new cool stuff, and maybe change our perspective on some stuff as well.
Right. Well, certainly COVID and all the craziness that has been surrounding it has highlighted a lot of risks in the economy, but certainly has highlighted a lot of opportunities. I know for our business in the event industry, it's highlighted a lot of limitations of our own stuff. How, with this lockdown, with what you do, I mean, let's start with what you actually do. What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
So probably the easiest way to say it is I'm a graphic designer. So I'm creative director at a digital agency called Genius Division, which is my own company. So we basically use technology to help people. I'll put my teeth back in. We use technology to help people solve problems, which means we make websites, apps, systems, and things like that to try and make people's lives a little bit easier, really. So my day-to-day job, a lot of it's design, being one of the owners, it's communicating with clients, it's doing the marketing side of stuff, which we've always been a bit rubbish at, but I'm trying to get better at. So yeah, it's kind of a mixed bag, really, my day job. But I guess my skill is design, but I also know quite a lot about programming. I'm quite interested in that. I build my own website, and when we first started Genius Division, I used to build all the websites too, and I know quite a lot about WordPress. I used to teach that too. We used to teach WordPress. So I'm kind of a mixed bag. I've got skills. Well, I don't know if I'd call them skills, but I've got knowledge of all kinds of stuff. If you to look at my character in some kind of RPG, I've got like a million different characteristics, but they're all just above 0, basically 1 or 2.
You're like the Red Mage from Final Fantasy.
Yeah, something like that.
You got balance on a lot of different areas. You sound like one of those people, maybe, and I feel like I relate with this a little bit, that when somebody asks, what do you do? That just is a super hard question to answer.
Yeah, I'm one of those people where when I tell my parents, I'm a designer, they don't know what that means. But when I tell people who do know what I actually do, they don't know what it means either, because I say I'm a designer, but I'm this and I'm that and I'm this and I'm that and I do this. Oh yeah, and I do this and I do that and I do this. So it is a little bit difficult. I kind of get excited about projects and trying new things, and I just go and do them, whether I know how to do them or not. And that becomes another kind of skill or attribute that I can add to kind of the bag and hopefully use it on something else in the future.
Just have a giant bag of tricks that you can pull from at any time. I love that approach.
Yeah, well, that's another thing as well. Actually, tricks. I I spent a couple of years back looking into magic and things like that as well. So I've got an entire drawer full of literal tricks as well.
Do you ever use those on client presentations? Just taking the juggling balls?
I've used magic in one conference talk at a front end conference, and I was in a room full of developers, and I was the last person on of the day, and I stood up and basically told them everything they were learning was too complicated, and you need to chill out and make things simpler. And I did two magic tricks in the middle of that talk to try and emphasize the point of stories. Basically, the most important thing is that we're telling a story rather than worrying about the latest technology and learning the new things and all that kind of stuff. That we need to get back to telling stories in interesting ways, and that can be done with something analog. And they were the magic tricks that I did, the analog magic tricks.
I feel like too sometimes, because we hail from very similar backgrounds, I feel like sometimes we get into these. I was just talking about this with somebody yesterday, that we get into these projects, we develop, if we're developing an app or a website or whatever it is, we're always going after kind of the next big project. We're always working on something new. But I feel like sometimes as an industry, we forget that what is just boring and sometimes the stuff we've forgotten to the average consumer, to the average business, is the magic key that just solves all their problems. What do you think of that?
Yeah, absolutely. I've got an example of this right from today. In fact, a couple of hours ago, one of our clients, they were sending emails out for an e-commerce site that they've got. So we work on an e-commerce site for them, and they were sending manual emails out because they had a specific thing they needed to send to people. And they were doing this through MailChimp and taking hours on every single order, and they're getting a lot of orders too. So I said to them, well, why don't you just attach a PDF to the product and then provide a digital download? And here you go, I've made something in Pages that took me 10 minutes that looks okay because Apple stuff does. And then they were like, oh, wow, this is amazing. Show me how to do it. And that's the kind of value that digital people and designers and agencies can provide sometimes. And that, when I did that, you think, oh, wow, it took me 10 minutes, but that saved them, potentially months of time over a couple of years. That saved them so much time, and it's going to make the product better as well. And we do tend to forget that a little bit sometimes because we sit on it on a day-to-day project, on a day-to-day basis.
Well, and we get into that trap of, we must go with something that's complicated or, solve a new problem because, the simple ones have already been solved. Like you can go and download, if you want to spin up a WordPress site, you can go and download WordPress and buy a theme and you're in business. Like that's not hard for us anymore. But for mere mortals, that stuff is almost impossible.
Yeah, I think that's where the no-code stuff comes in, and I do find it really exciting. I know there's a lot of things on both sides, and the conversation we were having around it. Well, how do you scale a startup from a no-code? But I think actually making prototypes with no-code software and actually making websites to a certain point is actually really cool and really powerful, because a point I made a couple of weeks ago on Twitter was no-code software is not getting rid of developers. It's not going to put developers out of a job. It's going to make developers 10 times faster than they used to be. And they're going to be able to make things amazing with it because they understand the technology underneath it. They've just been given a new tool that makes that thinking much quicker. I think that's where it's really exciting. What's going to be achieved with that in maybe a couple of years' time.
Plus, we can cut down on those development cycles. Like the most, it is what is the value of paying a bunch of developers to create a product, to create that first MVP, especially if you're 99% of the time going to throw it away.
Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that's often hard to sell to clients. That's where you've got to look at it not from a technology point of view and look at it in a more pragmatic way. And I think that's where no code tools will make that process, potentially even put it in the client's hands so they can make a prototype, bring it to you and say, well, I've made this. We've been running off this for a couple of months. Now we need to turn this into something that actually scales and works really well. That'd be amazing. That'd make everybody's job so much easier.
Oh yeah, instead of starting from absolutely nothing, starting from like, okay, we know this works because obviously you're using it and it's not scaling. Those are good problems to solve. It's just now what skill sets do we need to develop in our developers and our data people to make sure that those solutions are going to scale.
Yeah, I think also as well, it makes clients understand the process a little bit more. Clients have become very design savvy, and in general, the public are very design savvy now. I don't have many difficult conversations when I'm talking about design to clients often, but sometimes people aren't that tech savvy still, and a rise in no code tools, and to an extent, maybe these no code tools will turn into something like Squarespace that clients will be able to use. And then they start to understand the systems side of it, the processes side of it, which is often really difficult to explain to clients and make them understand that, no, this is the way that it's got to be. It can't be different every time. You need to think of a process that's going to scale well as well. And that's where I think it's really exciting, especially the kind of stuff that we do.
Right. Well, you also get them thinking about, instead of saying, we need an app or we need a website, instead of thinking in concrete terms like that, it starts to get them thinking about, we need to build a tool, whatever that tool looks like, to solve a specific business problem or to solve a specific problem. So I think you're absolutely right. You get them more design savvy, you get them more. And along the way, they start to get a little bit more tech savvy just because they have to think about how all these different system pieces fit together.
Yeah, I think that's where it's really exciting. But the stuff that we do, the projects where we're actually helping a business, actually using technology to solve problems, not just building them a brochure website, they're the most exciting projects because they actually get value from it and they actually potentially make money from it and improve their business. And yeah, they're the things where both sides win. Us working on the project, we're doing something really exciting to help a client actually do something that works. And the client saves money, saves time, just saves everything. Those are the kind of relationships you want, really.
Oh, absolutely. So your organization's working on a lot of no-code projects at the moment. At what point did you really start to look at the no-code solutions? Like when did this start?
Actually, in terms of our organization, we don't do any no-code stuff, but I'm interested in it myself because it's kind of looking to the horizon a little bit for us. And I'm also seeing how it could speed up prototyping or improve prototyping and things like that. A fairly recent change that we made was starting to use Figma. So probably a year or two ago. And Figma's basically, for people who don't know, it's like a UI design tool or an interface design tool that's all online. So that's the power of it. That's the bit that's really, really good. It's basically Google Docs for designing stuff. So you can have two designers working on something at the same time. You can see what both people are doing, and you can actually, you can mess with them as well. You can actually move their design and delete it and things like that. But it is super powerful for collaboration. And that was one of the first things I started to look at to improve the design process a little bit. And there's two of us now working on design stuff, and that's been so helpful over the last 50 days or something like that, where we've been able to actually collaborate to some extent even better than when we sat in a room together, because we're using the same tool at the same time, and it's just been really useful to use that. So those kind of things with Figma, it got me thinking. Obviously, I see no code stuff all the time because I follow a bunch of developers and I follow a bunch of no code people too. And I started messing with Webflow particularly. To be honest, I found it a little bit too complicated, which is weird, because I can build websites, but I found Webflow really complicated. So that's when it got me starting to think, what's the power of this and where is this going? Because I started to see developers kind of poo-pooing it a little bit, but then not another organization, but another bunch of people, all the people on Twitter talking about no code, absolutely loving it. So we've not really used it in a project particularly yet, but I am exploring it, and particularly Webflow. I mean, that's the one that everybody seems to be banging on about.
Interesting. Webflow. I hadn't, until you mentioned it just now, I hadn't heard of it. The one that I've worked with a little bit on our end, because we do a lot of Microsoft stuff, is the Microsoft Power Apps. That's their version of it, probably, if they work somewhat the same. We played with that a little bit. Having come from a development background, I think, and I wonder if the reason a lot of developers poo-poo this stuff is just because we've seen some no-code or boilerplate solutions in the past, and they have sucked. Like there are, I can think of one. I can't remember the name of the platform, but it basically, you could link it up to a database and it would spit out an iOS application. It would spit out an app for the iPhone. But as soon as you want to do anything complicated, it was a big pile of hot garbage. It was a nightmare to work with. So I wonder if some of the developers are just being a little bit jaded when it comes to no code.
When I first started seeing it, it started to remind me of things like Dreamweaver, and if we to go back a little bit further, Front Page and things like that. And it reminded me of the design view of those kind of things. And that's where I started thinking a little bit like a developer, thinking, oh my God, this is going to produce terrible code and it's not going to look nice and all that kind of stuff. But then I had to pull back a bit and remember that that's not really what this is for. It shouldn't really be to produce a production ready thing that will serve a company over a long period of time. It's just to get a prototype out, or it's just to prove an idea, and that's where it's really powerful. And that's where I think the conversation needs to go. But it's still early days with it. For stuff like Webflow and things, I think that they're way too complicated still for clients to use. I think there's something else that's going to come out, like I said, a Squarespace-esque no-code tool. And there is stuff out there to automate things in kind of a drag and drop way. But I think there's another level to it. It's going to get more automated. I've been thinking this for a long time. We've been running Genius Division nearly 10 years now. And we've seen over that time the Dreamweavers that used to have a design mode that produced really bad HTML. And now in Figma, you can copy and paste CSS and there's nothing wrong with it whatsoever. And you could put it straight into a website if you wanted to. So, we're getting close to automating some of this stuff, definitely.
Well, and you think about it, we already have some tools that can produce decent code for us and allow for rapid prototyping in limited areas. Like for me, in our company, we use stuff like JS Fiddle all the time to just quickly prototype out a small bit of layout and CSS, and then we go, okay, yeah, that looks good. We'll drop it into our styles and ship that. Like it's, so we already have some of that. Did you ever do any work with Visual Basic back in the day, like Visual Basic 6?
No, I've always messed with Linux stuff, PHP, that kind of thing. PHP was my gateway to learning programming. In fact, WordPress was my gateway to learning programming because I was one of those sad kids at 15, 16 years old that was messing with WordPress themes and not understanding a single bit of what was going on. But that's because it was built in PHP. That's where I started. And then we've just stuck with PHP, and it's what we all know. So we've actually never messed with Microsoft stuff at all.
Oh, wow. The reason I bring that up is the one thing about Visual Basic, love it or hate it, the one thing that I absolutely loved was that it had that drag and drop designer where you could basically install Visual Basic onto even the CEO's computer, and they could take buttons and drop downs and lists, whatever controls you wanted to, drop them on a surface and create a real fast prototype. And hit F5, and it would turn into an executable, and they could actually play around with it on their computers. And I mean, this is back in like 98, 99. I still feel like we sort of replicated it in the Microsoft world with the .NET framework and Windows Forms, but I still feel like we've never really gotten close to that point where somebody can create that no code where the non-tech savvy user can create that no code prototype, where they can just get something really quick onto their really quickly running on their machine, especially in the web world. That one's always been the hard one.
Yeah, I agree. I think the kind of things that we see that come to us are usually spreadsheets or something like that, which goes some way to explain the thinking, but there isn't the extra drag and drop step. But I think it requires people to understand how to think like a system too, which is a skill in itself, which is something that you learn over time, and it's not something that most people are that savvy about. They tend to say, well, can it do this in this instance, but then in this instance, can it do this and this and that kind of, they don't think the bigger picture. So I'm not sure whether no coding tools will ever be able to teach that kind of thing, but going some way with a drag and drop thing, definitely that'd help people understand.
Interesting you bring up that systems thinking. It still feels like a gap in the education system. I don't, or maybe it's not the education system to blame. Maybe it's something else. I mean, before we solve a problem, first we must assign blame, right?
I think the systems thinking thing, as well as the creativity thinking, those two methods of thinking are both of the things that are not taught in schools, particularly to a level. I think systems thinking is also linked to creativity anyway. It comes down to the fact that we're not encouraged to try and solve problems at school, and even in any kind of education. We're told this is the solution, this is a solution you must learn, and then you must repeat this rote until you are told not to repeat it again. So there's very little exploration of an idea. It's very, very rare you're given, I need you to get from X to Y, work out the solution. And I think that's where you start to develop both of those kinds of thinking, and that's definitely not what's encouraged in education, particularly not in Britain anyway.
I can definitely see it in Canada too. We did not really encourage that thinking. I found right up until my fourth year of university, we really did not explore that. How to think point A to point B instead of just looking at instead of just memorizing answers. Switching to, here's a problem, how do we solve it? I mean, that it was late in the game. So assuming that we have a system that doesn't really teach that systems-based thinking, how does one actually set about learning how to think in terms of systems? How do you develop? Obviously, first off, is that a skill that you can develop? And second, if it is, how do you develop it?
Whew, that's a big question to answer that one. For me, my own personal journey has just been messing with systems for the last 15 years or something like that, making bad systems over and over and over, and then getting a little bit better. And I think that's it's not exactly the most efficient way to learn something like that, but I think that ultimately is the way that you learn almost anything, including systems thinking. But I just think I really don't want to say this because I don't know whether I agree with it or not, but it's the whole right brain and left brain thinking thing. Some people, I don't agree that anybody is a completely right brain thinker or a completely left brain thinker. I think it's just that we've not all used the same parts of our thinking over and over. So some of us naturally become more creative rather than systems thinking. But I think it's just if you don't really practice that kind of skill, and often when you think about it, the average kind of job, in fact, most jobs, we're not really encouraged to solve problems in most jobs either. We've got a system that's already there. We might have processes that are already in the company. We're told, you start inside a company and you have to deal with a problem, and you go to a manager and you say, well, what do I do about this problem? And they say, well, we've got this procedure. So you follow the procedure. And even when you get into a job, you're often not encouraged to explore how to solve something. Therefore, if you never really have to create a system, you don't get good at creating systems, do you?
That's very true. I'm glad now because this week I just hired 2 co-op students and they started. It's been an interesting journey to let them loose on our marketing problems because I agree with you with I identify with the one quote about being, maybe not so great at marketing right now. It's where we've fallen down as somebody who is a recovering developer / programmer and turning to the sales side. It has been a bit of a change, as you might well appreciate. And just getting them to think in terms of, thinking about this, not just in here's a word, what blog post do we need to write in, and get them to think about what's the system that's going to get ultimately more people through the door, but ultimately allow us to serve more clients, especially in the current world of, we can't get together in person. I mean, we don't have a choice. We can't go press the flesh. We can't go do sales calls right now in person. We have to do it all online. How do we do that? How do we build that trust? Especially, we're a new brand. So it's been real interesting to shift into a manager role and start and really kind of develop these systems kind of on the fly. I've got a management training book somewhere behind me that I read, and it's like you read that, and it's it gives you some advice, but then you actually get into the real world and go, oh, this shit's hard.
Yeah, it is. And I think one of the things that's helped me learn marketing and learn a bunch of other things is to try and look for the fundamentals, read a couple of different things from different points of view, and start to analyze them and think, right, well, what is the commonality between these things? And there's always the fundamentals to discover underneath the problems that you're trying to solve, and those are the bits that often traditional education, whilst they should be good at teaching, you should be learning the fundamentals. Often we're not taught the fundamentals. We're taught rules, or we taught the modern rules. We're not taught the classic fundamentals. That goes for marketing. That goes for programming, for systems thinking, for creativity, all of those kind of things. And it's if you can start to try and understand the fundamentals and just keep saying them to somebody. So, for example, you've took on 2 people who are working on your marketing. One of the biggest fundamentals that I realized in marketing is providing value, whatever format you do it in, no matter what you are saying, whenever you are trying to do something for somebody, it needs to be providing value. And that cuts a lot of the shit out of normal marketing. The standard way of doing marketing for pretty much any business is to talk about themselves. So you cut that out straight away. Talking about yourself is very rarely valuable for anybody because nobody cares about you. So that fundamental for me in marketing, providing value, is something that I'm constantly thinking about and returning to. And then you can play with the formula of that. And obviously there's other fundamentals that build on top of that. But it's finding those people that talk about those things that can be difficult. Seth Godin is absolutely brilliant at it. He talks almost exclusively in fundamentals and simple formulas that work across not just marketing but even life. But it's finding those people that can be hard. It's making sure you're not reading a 1,000-page management book and trying to find the the commonalities in it. But that's tough. That comes with time working that out.
Well, and the more I find that the more that you work in a particular field, the more that you think like, oh man, I wish I had learned this early on. But sometimes I find sometimes just to even like take programming for instance, the biggest frustration I have with every single programming course is they're all written with the assumption that you already know a little bit about a programming language. And it's like nobody has ever managed to write that programming course that goes, if you don't know anything about programming, it's like, okay, you can now get into this. You can be a programmer. And I don't know. One day I want to write that course. I don't know what the hell it's going to look like, but I would love to be able to say, here's how to program if you're not a developer.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that one of the things I was working on just before lockdown was with a developer friend of mine. We were doing a series of YouTube tutorials where he taught me how to do something in WordPress. And I sat there as the dumb designer saying, well, what's that? I've never seen that. I don't understand that. And people that have seen the preview, we haven't done any of the rest yet. People have seen the preview, and I sent it to developers. They were all experienced developers, and they found my input really valuable because I'm sat there as the stupid designer saying the stuff that a lot of the developers are thinking. But it's people who make tutorials often on not just development but anything. They're suffering from the same thing we spoke about earlier. They forget that not everybody knows the absolute basics of what we're doing, or you forget them, or whatever. There's never ever a time where you shouldn't be returning to those fundamental ideas and saying them over and over again. I'm actually working on a design course right now that talks about just the 4 fundamentals of graphic design. It's entirely designed for people who don't know anything about design. And it just talks about 4 fundamentals and nothing else, because people don't talk about the fundamentals at all in complicated topics. I think maybe because they might feel like they're maybe a little bit stupid by talking about them. I don't know.
Or maybe it's just that it's that issue that we get so sucked into what we do that we forget, we've forgotten the fundamentals. They just become like a twitch reflex. We forget about the fundamentals completely and we don't actually cover them. And then that makes it so damn hard for anyone who wants to get into our industries, because it's just like, well, where are you getting these magic rules from?
Yeah. I a couple of years back, there was a friend of mine who was wanting to get into web design. And he was a personal trainer. So he was in fitness all his life. Barely used a computer. He was technologically savvy, I guess you could say, but he never used a computer like I did. And he started asking me, how do I get into web design? And I kept sending him links and things like that. And now, I think it's probably 2 years later, he's got a job in the industry, which is fantastic. But the thing that I realized when he kept asking me questions is, he'd say, right, well, I want to learn this thing. And then I'd always push back against him and say, no, you need to learn this basic thing first. And the way that he was learning, because he was doing all his learning self-taught off YouTube and buying courses off Udemy and things like that, he was doing the same thing everybody else does. You're trying to pull at this thread, and you're starting on this really complicated and thick thread, and then somebody says, now you need to learn this thread over here. And then he goes, oh, but he mentioned this thread, and then you've got this other thread, and all of a sudden you've got 100 threads that you're trying to hold in your 10 fingers, and you're trying to learn this incredibly complicated topic that really doesn't have to be that complicated, because a lot of that stuff you just do not need to know when you first start. But where do you go to find that information out when everybody is telling you, oh, you need to learn JavaScript? Why are you not learning JavaScript? Why are you not learning React? Everybody's React developers now. You need to learn that. But no, you don't. You need to understand the fundamentals. And then Googling that, where do you find that information?
Yeah. How do you Google for where to start to learn how to program? And this is the thing I found with hiring and firing developers is just, I will, I've got a developer on staff now that he knew fundamentals of programming, And getting him up to speed with all these different technologies was easy because he knew those fundamentals were tight. He understood the differences between types. He understood object-oriented programming. He had a good grasp on C and JavaScript-based languages. So switching him between C# and JavaScript was super easy. But I've had programmers that are just, they focus so deeply on one language that it's like, oh, I'm a Ruby developer. It's like, well, okay, well, this is a small company. We need you to do JavaScript. Well, I don't know how to do JavaScript. Learn.
Yeah.
And it was a case of that person did not know the fundamentals, and it was just really difficult to get them up to speed. It's tricky, and it's fundamentals of if you look up fundamentals of JavaScript, it doesn't necessarily lead you in the right direction, or sometimes it'll take you to just some ancient stuff.
Yeah, it's this constant demonization of the jack of all trades, master of none thing that really pisses me off. I tweeted the other week, diversify your expertise. And what I meant by that is you need to know what we've just been talking about, the fundamentals of a lot of things. And once you've got a learning process in your head on how to do that, you look for the fundamentals and you work up from there. That's pretty easy to do, and it's possible. And if you can specialize in something and become a specialist Ruby developer or a specialist designer who only designs sports logos or something like that. But I always think you're just putting yourself at a massive risk when you do that. It's the eggs in one basket thing. Once that thing disappears, which it will inevitably, once that thing's gone and you're irrelevant, then where do you go from there? Because you've spent so much of your career or time or energy on this one thing that's could potentially become irrelevant overnight. And it's a dangerous place to be. And I often think an unnecessary place to be.
Well, I find that people that go the hyper specialization route, they go stale. They reach a certain point and they stop growing. They're like, this is my niche. But it's like, okay, but you're not learning anything new in that niche. You're doing the same thing over and over again. I remember listening to an episode of .NET Rocks a long time ago. This was like 2005, 2006. And he was talking about this idea of developers that list, I have 10 years of experience working in Visual Basic. And he said, no, you have 1 year of experience 9 times over.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm seeing this in kind of the web industry at the minute as well, with designers all trying to specialize on specific things. They're either UX designers or UI designers, or even often more niche than that. And we get into this point, particularly in the web industry, basically the tech industry really, where everybody's trying to specialize in something constantly. They're all trying to niche right down. And there's the kind of the voices that sit at the edge, a little bit like me, a little bit of a grumpy old designer, that say that, well, I've been a UI designer for 15 years because I've been designing interfaces for 15 years. It's nothing special. It's just a different marketing term that you're slapping on something. But when you start to specifically niche down to one of them, UX designer, for example, you are learning all the fundamentals and the skills of what is current and of the day, which is the UX designer thing. And that comes with a lot of stuff that you'd learn from that. But that's going to disappear at some point and everybody's going to want the other thing back. So it's tough to sometimes know when the things that you are saying is outdated or you do need to move on. But you've also got to be careful at the same time that you're not following the trends of the time and trying to stay classic, I guess.
So I guess that's the dichotomy that we face in any industry is how do you both stay current and stay relevant, not niche down too hard, but still carve out a name for yourself? Because there's, it's like, I think you and we have trouble describing what we do because we're capable of doing so much, but is part of our challenge that sometimes that question is just way too broad, that we need to learn how, that if we're going to say, you know what, we are jack of all trades, and I would identify with that label, that we say, okay, we might be jack of all trades, but do we need to learn how to say, you know what, for this particular client, I can't answer the question of what do I do until I know what you might need me for.
Yeah, it's often tough. I wrestle with that constantly, particularly on Twitter and particularly my quote unquote personal brand. I wrestle with it constantly. What I call myself, what I am. Am I a designer? Am I a marketer? Am I a developer? Am I a creative director? What does any of that even mean? I wrestle with it constantly. But what I do know is that all of the sporadic knowledge that I've got when it comes to a client project, I can provide a ton of value in all kinds of different places that they wouldn't necessarily get from somewhere else. That, as you mentioned, we're a small agency too. There's only 5 of us. So I have to have all that sporadic knowledge. The other designer in Genius Division knows endless stuff about AWS and is a whiz with that kind of stuff, and we've all got this weird kind of knowledge that's all over the place. I can build a WordPress website if I wanted to, and I can jump in on any of the WordPress projects that we've got and actually develop stuff. But I'm a designer, and then so can the other designer, and then the developers are quite capable at design. So it's difficult communicating that to clients, which that's the problem that we all face, which is why when we launched our new website, we changed it to say that we solve problems rather than we're necessarily a web design agency or a digital agency, which people maybe would classically put us as. The thing I always think though is I come back to the value thing. It's trying to say to your clients what you can do for them rather than saying the things that you can do. It doesn't matter necessarily how you achieve the things that you say that you're going to do, but it's the client is coming to you to achieve something, and that's the thing that you've got to tell them you can achieve.
I just had another brainwave related to this idea of telling them what you can achieve for them, is this idea that you've been chasing on Twitter for a little while, which is taking the same idea and putting multiple spins on it. So really kind of that idea of repeating yourself. Am I interpreting it correctly?
Yeah. That's ultimately that's what marketing is, isn't it? It's repeating yourself over and over.
Repeating yourself, but the interesting spin that I'd never thought of, but it makes perfect sense, is this idea of you've taken one idea, but you've put, I think your tweet was something like, if you can't think of 7 things, let alone 7,000 ways to say the same thing, then you're not thinking hard enough. I might be totally butchering the quote. I should actually go and look it up. I remember thinking like, wow, that's a really neat way to look at the marketing problem. Because it's like we're always looking for kind of multiple, it's like we need all these different angles, but taking the same thing and putting multiple different spins on it is, would you say that's a fundamental skill worth learning?
Yeah, absolutely. The original thing comes from, I saw Jack Butcher tweet, I don't know, a couple of months ago now. He just put, find 1,000 ways to say the same thing. And it just stuck in my head, and I could have sworn I'd read it somewhere else. And I said to Jack, where did you read this, or did you make this up? And he said, I thought I'd heard of it somewhere or something, but I haven't been able to find anywhere. But just saying that, find 1,000 ways to say the same thing, that instantly put the light bulb in my head too. And that's when I wrote the tweet about, if you can't even find 7 ways to say the same thing 1,000 times, then you're going to struggle with anything that you do. This kind of coalesced for me more recently on Twitter, particularly because I wrote a book 2 or 3 years ago that I called Extreme Production, which was all about, people ask me all the time, how do you do so much stuff? And I got sick of saying what I just do. So I wrote a book to explain this is how I do it. And I binned the book off instantly. I wrote the book, put it on Gumroad, I think at the time, or somewhere else, and I binned it off because I kind of felt a little bit embarrassed about it, I guess. I went through all the thing. Who am I to write a book? Who am I to talk about productivity? Who am I to talk about philosophy and all these kind of things? I'm a designer and I should be sticking to my lane. I should be talking about design, about everything. So I were back then, 2018, me was thinking that I needed to talk more about design. And then fast forward to now, I discovered Jack Butcher, discovered Visualize Value, and discovered all of these people that I never discovered before. And it made me realize that I had this asset, which was extreme production, that I live every kind of single day of my life. And I need to be talking about that thing more and finding 1,000 ways to say that thing, because everything that I'm saying in that is relevant to people, and it's relevant across design, and it's relevant across multiple different areas. So I started to think of this idea about how do you say the same thing 1,000 times? And I came up with kind of, I made a YouTube video on it. I think I call it the content filter, which is basically picking 4 things that you talk about all the time. So in my case, it's daily practice, it's consistency, it's fundamentals, that kind of stuff. The stuff I naturally talk about anyway. And anything that you want to say, passing it through that filter of those 4 things that you want to say. So if you're running a business, for example, you might have 4 kind of values or your vision statement or something like that. You might have 4 things that you want to say. Say that one of the things is that you make, you're interested in helping systemize processes that are inefficient. So you talk about inefficiency. So anything that you say, you could be talking about sheep in a field, and you just come up with the idea, whatever it is, just a random idea, sheep in a field. Right, I need to pass it through the filter of inefficiency, and then you think of a way to link the 2 topics together, basically. So you talk about, I don't know, a sheep that's only got 2 legs instead of 4. It's an inefficient sheep. We can help you get your sheep to have 4 legs again. Buy this, something like that. And that's a completely butchered idea. I made it up off the top of my head, but that's the kind of thinking that I started to think about. So I think about these things all the time. Everything you say, you pass through that filter, and then you automatically start saying the same thing 1,000 times. And the difficulty with that, I found, is you get bored with it. So you're saying the same thing over and over, and because you're getting bored with it, you think everybody else is. But everybody else is following you to hear those same things because they followed you for that reason in the first place. And that's the bit that most people struggle with. And that essentially is marketing in a nutshell.
Well, it strikes me that even though we might get bored of saying the same thing over and over, it fits one of Dr. Robert Cialdini's principles of influence, which is consistency. You might say, quote unquote, the same thing in different ways, but the underlying theme, that fundamental, remains the same. It links all these different ideas. So it's like you see, talking about the systemizing inefficient processes, it's like, okay, here's another example, here's another example, here's another example. So it doesn't just feel like that solution, the way that you're saying it, is a one-off, which I think is where sometimes we fall down in our marketing efforts.
There's the idea in advertising, isn't there? You need to see something 10 times before it sticks in. Excuse me. You need to see it 10 times. So you need to see an advert 10 times, or you need to see a Facebook advert, then you need to see a Twitter advert, etc., etc. It's not until at least the 10th time where you take action on the thing that you've seen. And I think with the way that we live now, where we're just bombarded with messages on every kind of platform, I think that particular thing, particularly on social media, is much, 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 much higher. I've got no statistics for it, but I'd say it's at least 50, maybe 100 times or something like that before anything sticks in. Because if you think about it, I tweet 10 to 20 times a day. Last month, I tweeted 1,000 times. Probably of those 1,000 tweets, you might have seen my tweets, maybe 30 of them or something like that. So it's going to take you at least 3 or 4 months before you even start to consider any of the ideas that I'm talking about, because the message that I'm putting out, whilst it's 100% of my time, it's 0.001% of your time and thinking, because you're just busy with other things and you're following other people and you're getting other ideas into your head too. So yeah, it's a tough one.
Interesting. That's a totally different way of thinking of social media too. That idea that and it makes intuitive sense. There's so much content competing for our attention, and I feel like this is a trap I've fallen into with my own promotion, whether it's my podcast, whether it's my business, whatever it might be, which is like, okay, we tweet this out a few times. It doesn't seem to get a response. It's like, well, do I need to go to sponsored ads? Like, what am I doing? And it's just like, no, dummy, you need to just talk about this more. Like, you can't just put this thing out there like 2 or 3 times and expect to get any sort of reaction to it. Like, you need to be quote unquote active. You need to be posting about this and finding new angles and new ways.
Yeah, and it takes time too. That's the bit that we're all so terrible at, me included. We're all terrible at it. It can take 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever, to become known for a particular thing. And if you think I've been tweeting since 2008 or whatever, I've only really been taking it seriously, particularly like I am now, probably 3 or 4 months, and I'm getting to that point where I'm feeling a little bit bored of myself already. And I'd probably need to do that maybe another 4 or 5 years before I become known for that thing. So we all stop before things actually start to develop. I did a podcast every day for 365 days, and it was nowhere near the kind of level I'd want it to be. And I did one every day. I did 365 of them. So, it takes time and patience.
But it's the one nice part that I find with creating new content, with putting anything new out there, is it's another asset that you can talk about. It's another thing that you can add to your toolbox to say, like, look, here's another thing that I do. And it's an opportunity to link your different ideas together. What do you think?
I think that's an absolute foundational thing. I did a video about it the other day called The Content Onion, which was trying to put a principle behind this idea that we need to create something that the content onion is basically a big thing. So that could be a podcast or a video, a book, a long article, or basically anything. That is the thing that people are definitely not going to consume in one sitting, because we just talked about, I get 0.001% of your time every day. If I put out a 60-minute video, you are not going to watch it unless you've got some spare time. And even then, you probably won't watch it because you'll be watching Tiger King on Netflix. So you're not going to consume the big thing that I've just made, the content onion. You're going to consume the little bits of the content onion, the peelings of it, that I'm going to present to you on Twitter or Facebook or Instagram or whatever. So you create a big thing, and then you distribute the big thing in different ways across different mediums that's more appropriate for people to actually consume in a snackable format. That's an idea that I've never really done before until these last couple of months. Gary Vee has been doing this probably nearly 10 years now or something. He made an article on his website a while ago called 64 pieces of content in one day. And it's a link to a PowerPoint presentation. It talks about how to make 64 pieces of content in one day. The thing he misses out is that he's got an entire team to make those 64 pieces of content in one day. I think his team's at about 20 or 30 people now or something. But there's ideas in that which I try to bring about in that content onion video. There's that single people like us can actually achieve, because you've got to remember as well that you and I have both got day jobs, right? We've actually working probably 9 to 5 on something else, rather than this thing. The conversation we're having right now, it might indirectly affect what we do during the day, but these are all extras on top of actually doing the work. So we've got to figure out ways to actually turn that stuff into a more efficient thing. So I made the Content Onion video, and with the Content Onion video, I made that thread that you saw where I wrote the same tweet 10 times in one day. Then I made a longer thread about that where I said the same 10 things 10 times again. And then I sent it out as an email with that thread in it with a link to the video. So I got four or five, maybe 20 or 30 pieces of content out of that one idea. And that's the idea, that we don't always like doing that because we think we're going to bore people. And that's the thing we've got to get over, the fact that you only saw my idea. I bet you didn't even see the Content Onion video, did you?
Well, I did see it and I watched part of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
But again, you're absolutely right.
You didn't watch the whole video, but you saw the tweets, and you probably didn't see my email either. So, and I could take that further. I could make it into a podcast next and things like that. So even though you follow me on Twitter and we're having this conversation right now, even you haven't consumed all the kind of elements of that particular Content Onion, so to speak.
Right. That's a fascinating way to look at it too. And because I've been thinking about different pragmatic approaches I could take to making content. How can I produce more content out of what I've got? And like one of the ways that I used to do it and that I want to bring back was I had a system where I was able to quickly generate 1-minute videos out of these podcasts, where I basically it applied a quick background, a quick filter, and snipped a minute of audio, and then I could post that video up to YouTube. The problem that I kept running into is, even though I had made it somewhat efficient, it was still slow. It still required me to jump to a certain point, jump through command line hoops, run a batch process to, create my title graphics. And it was just really, I found it time consuming. But it's like, are there ways that we could create, are there tools that we could use to basically multiply the content we create? I've now got a system where I can basically take my audio recordings, have them transcribed immediately, and within an hour have a full transcript back, roughly accurate, make some mistakes from time to time. I was like, could I turn part of that into a blog post? Could I look for keywords that keep popping up? The possibilities do, like, when you look at it from that angle, all of a sudden the possibilities feel endless for what you can do with some content.
Yeah, it becomes the power of being able to edit it, actually curate the bits of the content that you've made that is valuable beyond the original piece of content that you've made. That's the bit that I can't crack personally, that I can't do. That's why Gary Vee is so popular, because he's got a team to basically trawl through all his past stuff and curate the bits, the 1-minute snackable pieces that are excellent. Because if you spend enough time talking all day long, you're going to say something that's of value at least 10 times or something. And you've got potential to turn that in. This is what Gary Vee does very well. He turns it into tweets, he turns it into a podcast, he turns it into a blog, he turns it into an email, and then he goes and says it again on YouTube or whatever, which gets turned into another email, which gets turned into another tweet, a podcast, etc., etc. And it just feeds the whole system over and over when you think like that. But I've not, particularly video, that's the bit I'm struggling with at the minute. I've got on a Sunday, I chat with another designer on kind of like a design show type thing. That's a 60-minute conversation. I'm editing that at the minute, and the way I'm trying to pull snippets out is, as I'm editing it, I hear the key quote and I pull it out into a separate video. But it's not efficient. I could do with a more efficient system for that. But I'm aware that we're making a big 60-minute piece of content that most people are not going to consume. And at the minute, that idea, the whole podcast and the whole video isn't being exploited as much as it can be. But that's purely a time thing, really.
Time or system thing. As soon as I get my my little video snipping thing solved, I'll ship it over to you so that you can use it as well. Because it's like, as I know, it just needs a couple of minor tweaks, but it's literally something where you can just say, starting at this time, give me a clip that's 2 minutes long, and it just gives you, it literally just gives you a raw video file that you can upload somewhere. So I'll tweak that and I'll send it your way.
Definitely, yeah. I often think that once you've got the system down and the system's not that complicated, it's just creating the technology that makes the system a little bit easier. In your instance with the marketing interns, often it's just easier in that instance. Maybe you should just get them to trawl previous content and to not rehash, but repurpose the content that you've already got to a system. Do you know what I mean? Right.
Yeah, because God knows my brain dumps, and that's putting it nicely. There's been a lot of content there. I think I know what I'm going to be doing as soon as we're done on this podcast. And actually, we've gotten to the 1 hour mark, and I want to be respectful of your time because I imagine you've got a million things that you got to do too.
Yeah, I've still got some stuff I want to do today.
So I think that's a wonderful point to close off our conversation, Craig. If people want to learn more about you, where would you like them to go to find you on the internet?
I've got a website, just getdoingthings.com, which I've got all of my various brain dumps on there. That's got links to everything on there. Just go over to that.
Awesome. Craig, it has been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for making the time. I know I learned a ton, and we got to talk about all sorts of cool design stuff and wear all sorts of hats, and I'm sure we'll talk again sometime soon.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And dear listener, thank you so much for listening. We will talk to you again. Go wash your hands. Have a wonderful day.